With that, the recording is now on, and I will turn it over to you, Anna.
Great, thanks, Sarah, and thank you to the State Law Library for hosting us today. And thanks everyone for being here with us for today's CLE. This CLE is a project of the MSBA's Access to Justice Committee, and please feel free to visit the MSBA's website to learn more about the committee if you're interested in learning more. But this CLE is intended to be a resource to communicate with the broader bar so that people can have more access to knowledge about how civil legal aid works. It's our hope that we can help reach more lawyers to understand how civil legal aid works and how they can be involved in supporting it. So I will start with introductions of our speakers. So we will have Judge Thomas Gilligan with us today. Judge Gilligan has been a judge in Ramsey County since 2014. He is currently the lead judge in the Juvenile Family and CHIPS Division and was formerly the lead judge in the Civil Division. Bridget Jernander is the Legal Services Grant Program Manager for the Minnesota Judicial Branch and the Executive Director of Minnesota's Legal Services Advisory Committee, or also known as LSAC. Emily Fraley is an assistant county attorney in the Dakota County Attorney's Office, where she handles criminal prosecution and was previously an assistant Hennepin County Public Defender, as well as a law clerk in Minnesota's 4th Judicial District. And my name is Anna Beadle, and I am the Executive Director at Minnesota Justice Foundation, and I chair the MSBA Access to Justice Committee's Resource Development Subcommittee. Let's see. So we have you with us for an hour today, and it's going to be a high-level overview, but it's our hope that this presentation will help you better understand the civil access to justice system and the role that each of us can play to strengthen that system to ensure that all people receive the legal help that they need. Our goal is also to get this information to new audiences, and we have an outline for this presentation that's available that we're glad to share with you if you'd like to present it to another group of your colleagues. We'll be covering access to justice, civil legal aid, disparities, and how to get involved. We'll start with a fairly high-level overview and then go into talking about all of the programs in the state of Minnesota that come together as a network to serve the whole state. We'll talk about how that network of service providers are funded. And then we'll go into some detail about opportunities to get involved on a pro bono basis in civil access to justice work, as well as the role of the courts and special court initiatives that have been impactful in increasing access to justice. We should have a few minutes at the end to be able to talk about questions, but please do put the questions in the chat. So talking about the big picture of civil access to justice in Minnesota, this presentation is a high-level overview of what all goes into the system of helping low-income Minnesotans address their civil legal matters. Minnesota is a leader nationally with innovative and robust offerings, but the details of how all of it works can still be confusing, as there are so many players and so many moving parts. So this will be a view from 30,000 feet, if you will, to better understand our system as a whole. So again, we're fortunate to have a strong and collaborative civil access to justice system, and programs across the state come together to meet the legal needs of low-income Minnesotans. But at the same time, as you'll kind of find out later in the presentation, there is not enough funding or pro bono support to meet the need in our state. And this tracks with what we know nationally, where in a 2022 national study, a finding was that low-income Americans did not get any or enough help for 92% of their substantive legal problems. So that's just kind of a backdrop as we're thinking about these issues. We wanted to talk a little bit about some definitions for our presentation today so that we can be on the same page about those. So we have 4 definitions here. There are certainly more that we could get into if we were having a longer conversation. And if you have other questions about terms or other definitions, please feel free to raise them in the chat throughout. So first, with civil access to justice, one thing we're doing here is distinguishing between civil and criminal matters, but a person having a civil matter, being able to get help to deal with it, um, and feeling like the process that they went through to do that was fair, which I think as officers of the court is something that is good for all of us to keep in mind, is perceptions of fairness of how our system is working. Next is legal aid. And then third is pro bono. So we're wanting to just help kind of differentiate between the group of attorneys who work as paid legal aid staff to work full-time on matters where they're providing free legal services to low-income clients, and then also honoring that there are many volunteer attorneys across the rest of the bar who are also involved in this important work of providing free legal services to low-income clients, some of which happens through the providers, like what we would call a legal aid office, that is, and as well as through other initiatives. And then fourth, income eligibility is something that we wanted to flag for you because many of the programs that serve low-income clients have income or asset criteria that have an impact on who is able to access those services. And that might, sometimes you might hear about another term called the access to justice gap, which might refer to people who are above that income threshold but still can't afford a private attorney. So those are some definitions for today. And the next we wanted to talk about, so getting into a little bit about what legal aid does, like what is the work of legal aid, and it's about helping low-income people with their civil legal problems. It's essential for strong communities, and it's about addressing basic and fundamental human needs. From a national study that we had cited earlier, 3 in 4 low-income households experienced one or more civil legal problems in the previous year. And these are problems that would generally involve, again, basic needs like safe housing, access to healthcare, and safety from abuse. The slide outlines kind of 3 core areas of family, housing, and economic stability, and some specific case types that are things that legal aid might help with. The alternative, if our paid legal aid staff or pro bono attorneys are not able to assist because people don't connect with them, or they're not able to serve them for another reason that will be discussed later in the presentation, that would mean that people would be needing to go it alone without access to those services, which generally has it just is a worse experience for people who are facing complicated legal challenges and can lead to a worse outcome. Civil legal aid is also like really looking at addressing disparities based on race, gender, economic status, and other factors. We know that Minnesota has significant racial disparities related to education, employment, and income, with people of color being more likely to be experiencing poverty. So if we go back to that last statistic about 3 in 4 households dealing with one or more legal problems per year, this means that there are significant racial disparities when it comes to civil legal problems, and it's really important work that legal aid is able to do to help people navigate the civil legal system and help to address their rights and go through the court process more successfully. So next we wanted to cover a little bit about all of the players in the access to justice system, and all which we also call stakeholders. Because Minnesota's access to justice system evolved over a period of time in an organic way based on local needs, there are many organizations that have a role to play in helping people get access to the legal services that they need to address civil legal problems. This is not even an exhaustive list, and there's a lot of coordination and communication across stakeholders to understand who's doing what and what the emerging needs are. You'll see law libraries are on here in the top right corner, and we'll talk a little bit in the pro bono section about how they can support attorneys doing pro bono. But one thing that when you're looking at this graphic with all these different stakeholders, from the private bar to law schools to government offices, I think it might raise a question about how a potential client would figure out where to go to get the help that they need. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight there was that Law Help MN is a great website that we hope you'll remember this, and please check it out at lawhelpmn.org. This is a central website to our system. It does a lot. It's the connection point for people to legal aid. There's online intake, phone intake. There's a bunch of frequently asked questions sheets. It's available in multiple languages. And there are even computers across the state called legal kiosks where people can use those computers to access this website if they don't have a computer or internet access at home. We know that the last stat that we had was that there were at least 500,000 visits per year. So this is a great resource to know about, and something that you can use if people are contacting you asking for help. So next I'll turn it over to Bridget.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everybody. I'm still not used to talking to my computer screen instead of to people, but I'm grateful for all of you attending today and for those watching the recording. As Anna said, my job is in the judicial branch, focused on civil legal aid funding and policy. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the issues we're going to talk about today, and I'm grateful for your interest in how the system works and how we can make it better with lots of different participants. So going to the next slide, as Anna mentioned, we use the word organic from time to time to talk about the civil legal aid system in Minnesota. There, as you can see from the map, a variety of regions, and as you can see from the right side of the slide, a variety of programs that are funded to provide direct legal services in Minnesota. They have different focus. Some are geographically based, some are issue based. As you can see from the list of providers, Immigrant Law Center focuses on immigration, whereas Children's Law Center focuses on child in need of protection and services. Disability Law Center is also self-explanatory. So as you look down the list, you can tell how the kind of patchwork quilt of services comes together. But the beauty of our work in the last few years has been that you don't have to know what all of the requirements of all of these programs are. We've really been working to coordinate so that there's centralized referrals. Anna mentioned the Law Help MN website that provides, that is kept up to date by all of the programs, so that you could make a referral to Law Help MN and have access to every one of these programs without having to know their income requirements or their geography. We also have a centralized phone number that has gone live with the state with 1-877-MY-MN-LAW that provides a centralized phone number that also accesses the regional programs in the state. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that when we talk about the Civil Legal Aid Network, and I'm going to be going through some statistics here in a minute, that does mean both staff programs and pro bono programs, as Anna said. We think of those together. 25% of all of the services provided in the state are provided by private attorneys, so it's a significant portion of the services provided in our state. So we want to think about them both, staff and pro bono, together. All right, next slide. All right, so in addition to the geographic and issue regions that we were just talking about, there is also a variety of services that are provided by the Civil Legal Aid Network. Everything from legal information, know your rights, to the next two circles with advice and brief service and full representation are focused on actual direct representation services, where you have a lawyer who has entered into an attorney-client relationship and is providing either limited scope services with advice and brief service or full representation working with the client throughout the case. We also, in the system, spend a good amount of resources on policy and systems work, which is really important, obviously, trying to improve the system as a whole. So all of these work together. And so when we're talking about the continuum of services, that's what we mean as far as this range. Okay, next slide, Anna. This is just a quick statistic of the case types of that are closed by the program statewide. Family and housing always make up more than half of the services provided. They have been growing. In the last few years, it used to be about 50% family and housing. And as you can see from the pie chart, post-pandemic, we have seen an increase in both family and housing cases. With the other slice that is purple there, to give you a sense of a big percentage, what is included in the other category that we just have too small of percentages to list them all separately, includes things like tax cases, employment cases, bankruptcy cases, education law. It's a wide variety. So if you think about the wide range of civil issues faced by low-income people, the pie chart basically has some level of service for a wide range, but family and housing are the majority. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to spend some time talking about the demographics of clients served. We've put a lot onto one slide here. Starting with the racial demographics, you can see that 47% of legal aid clients, again, including both the pro bono and staff programs, all mixed together. This is 2023 data, in case you're interested in the data we're looking at, are white with 53% people of color. And the important part to note there, as Anna mentioned, Minnesota has a significant racial disparities in the poverty population generally. 30% of Native Americans and 25% of Black Minnesotans live in poverty as compared to only about 7% of the white population. And so it isn't a surprise that although the majority of Minnesotans are white, that more than half of the services provided to low-income Minnesotans are to people of color. And this is something that is a high priority for all of the civil legal aid programs, is looking at racial disparities in how the legal issues that are being presented to them and how that can be addressed. There is ongoing work with having more community-based services, partnering with community organizations that are focused on communities of color and trying to bridge the gap in how services are provided and how justice can be obtained for communities of color in Minnesota. When you look back at the 1993 Racial Fairness Task Force report, which is a significant number of years ago now, I'm always surprised at how similar the statistics read and how similar the discussion is about the importance of civil legal aid in meeting the challenges of racial fairness in our system generally, and specifically in the Minnesota court system. So it continues to be a focus for civil legal aid. For the gender demographics, we have, as you can see, 67% female, 33% male clients. And we have had some questions, sometimes from the legislature, sometimes from others, about why a majority of clients are women. I think it's important to note, we're going to talk about case priorities in a few slides, and significant case priorities are focused on domestic violence cases and on representing the custodial parent, which means that in those case types in particular, the vast majority of clients are female. It's also true in Minnesota that more women live in poverty than men, higher poverty rates, especially for female-headed households, the poverty rates are significantly higher than for two-parent households. And so with all of those dynamics at play, we continually see a majority of clients who are female rather than male. For the age slide, we have a growing number of seniors who are represented by civil legal aid. In preparing for the presentation today, I was looking at some of the trend data that you can find on mncompass.org. It's my favorite website for demographic information. And I noted for the first time that they're focusing on a large increase in the poverty population for seniors in Minnesota, particularly since the pandemic. Apparently, we are seeing an increase of, it went from 7% of seniors in Minnesota live in poverty before the pandemic to 9%, which is a significant percentage increase, and something that a lot of social services organizations are trying to focus on, especially as the senior population in Minnesota is growing significantly. And so focus on providing services to seniors is something that legal aid has always done, and I think will be a bigger portion of case priorities in the future. All right, next slide. So we have thrown out a lot of numbers about how many people are low-income people are facing legal crises, and significantly more people contact legal aid than we have the resources to serve. So this slide focuses on, how do you screen, how do you do the triage to decide who gets services and who doesn't? And so it's slightly complicated, as you can see from the number of bullet points here. Each program sets their own criteria. So it's their board of directors and the staff of the organization is working together to try to prioritize services based on the resources they have available. So they're looking at income limits. One of the reasons that a variety of programs set their income limits at 125% of poverty, some set it up to 200%. Volunteer Lawyers Network goes up to 300% of poverty for advice cases. That range is really an analysis of how many people do we have to serve and how do we focus services on the people who are least likely to be able to navigate the court system themselves. So there's going to be an income analysis. There's also going to be, is this a priority case for us? The importance of case priorities, I think, is it's kind of something that we don't talk about a lot, but each of the programs goes through a process. Some of them are more formal than others. If you receive Federal Legal Services Corporation funding, you're required to do a prioritization process every 5 years, which means reaching out to community groups, to potential clients, to past clients, and really trying to engage about what should be our case priorities, what are the most important legal issues that our community is facing, and how can we really focus resources as much as possible. Usually those priorities are around safety, stability, health, shelter. So that's why domestic violence is such a high priority for particularly family law cases with all the programs, eviction cases, particularly eviction from public housing, where there really is a very time-sensitive and safety or shelter criteria there. For merit, it's also important to note that cases are screened to see if there's a legal solution to the problem. Because civil legal aid is not a right to counsel situation like the public defender's office, there is merit screening to see if there's a way that the case can be where there's legal defenses or legal arguments to make. And if there's not, then usually legal information is provided about why. You might get advice about why your case is not meritorious, but not be something that is represented beyond that. Geography is self-explanatory, thinking back to the map that we saw earlier. And capacity, this is something that we are thinking about a lot. What should be a caseload capacity? What is just too much to expect from the staff who are basically trying to drink from the fire hose of cases, and having to say no to people when you're at capacity is obviously very difficult. We also want to note that there are restrictions and requirements from funders, and that might be government funders like myself. We don't have a lot of restrictions at the state level, but at the federal level, particularly with the Federal Legal Services Corporation, there are some restrictions that come with that funding. There's also foundations that say we'll only fund you to do this kind of project or this kind of work. And so you're having to kind of put together a jigsaw puzzle with all of the different funders to see what your service level can be. So it is not a simple process. And again, just saying that one of the reasons we've done all the work to have Law Help MN and centralized intake is so that you don't have to know all the answers to all these questions when making a referral. You can send anyone to Law Help MN and the system will navigate this for you rather than having to understand all the details. Next slide. So the sad reality is that with available resources right now, the last time we did a turn down study was in 2022. So this data is a few years old now. But historically speaking, of the people who know to contact civil legal aid, in our either calling or coming in through online intake or a legal clinic, 45% are receiving some level of legal services. Again, going back to that continuum we talked about earlier, might be getting advice or brief service. And the 28.6, the smallest group in that graphic, is the folks who are fully served, are receiving full representation through their case. And that's a percentage that we would really like to increase with additional resources. So speaking of resources, is legal aid, did the pie chart just go away, Anna, or that's next? Okay, yeah, so this section is about funding. And this is really what my job is, what I spend a lot of time thinking about. So the Legal Services Advisory Committee that I staff is responsible for, let's see, the state appropriation piece of the slide. So the 38% blue slice of the pie you can see there. IOLTA, which is interest on lawyer trust accounts, the green slice there, which in the last fiscal year was only 2% of revenue, but has been going up because interest rates have been higher for a significant period of time. So we'll see that slice of the pie increase in the next fiscal year. And then the purple attorney registration fee, that is part of all Minnesota attorneys' registration fee goes to grants to civil legal aid that's managed through the Legal Services Advisory Committee. So those three slices of the pie are what I spend my time on. But as you can see, legal aid organizations statewide have multiple revenue streams and have to kind of figure out how to balance all of these different pieces. Some of them are highly unpredictable. IOLTA, as I mentioned, goes up and down with interest rates. But also we've seen quite a bit of swings in private donations as well as foundation funding, particularly with United Way as well as other foundations changing dramatically as they change their priorities for their funding. So, but that is the total pie. I should say that in 2023, all of the slices of the pie here, sorry, let me go to my, not keeping up with my notes. I don't want to give you the wrong number. Yeah, so for 2023, this was just over $64 million is what this pie represents, which pays for the salaries of approximately 575 staff statewide, as well as all the other costs that are associated, obviously overhead, interpreters, rent, all of those things. So 64 million is, compared to other states, Minnesota does have a well-funded civil legal aid system, but thinking back to the chart of how many people are turned away, we're still trying to improve those service level numbers. Okay, next slide. Focusing in for just a moment on the legislative appropriation, that was 38% of funding. I just wanted to mention the last legislative session was particularly just historic as far as the amount of funding that went to civil legal aid. We received an 84% increase from the legislature in the last legislative session. That ask was specifically focused on increasing salaries for civil legal aid attorneys. The starting salary for civil legal aid attorneys, the average starting salary across all the organizations was about $55,000. And the turnover rate was really horrendous, as you can imagine, when the salary rate is so low compared to other public service attorneys, at the public defender or at the courts. And so the focus of this legislative increase was on increasing salaries across the board for legal aid attorneys. And so with that increase, we have been able to have the starting salary move from that 55,000 level that I mentioned to more than 70,000. And we're looking to continue to increase that to be competitive with other public attorney salaries and reduce turnover, which obviously then increases service when we can retain and recruit attorneys. Okay, next slide. So the key takeaways here are that although there was a significant funding increase at the legislature and has made salaries more competitive, we are sadly still turning away a majority of eligible clients. If you think back to that pie chart of funding sources, for a healthy nonprofit organization, which is what legal aid is, it's not like the public defender where 100% of their funding comes from the state. They really need a diversity of funding sources to be a healthy nonprofit that can weather the ups and downs of foundation funding, economic change. And so the support that they receive from the bar is critically important in maintaining a healthy system. All right. So with that, we are moving over to Pro Bono and Emily.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Emily Fraley. I'm an assistant Dakota County attorney in the criminal division. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about pro bono work, why it's important, what the goals are within our in Minnesota. And I'll just start by saying that we're very aware that a lot of people on this particular CLE are probably people that work in government services of some kind, the public sector. Obviously, that's not everybody, but what I want to say as a starting point is if you work in the public sector, don't check out. I know that there's a feeling that there's no opportunity for pro bono because of conflicts of interest, but we want to kind of encourage the idea that there are ways to give back, whether it's through limited volunteer opportunities or things like the Access to Justice Committee. So I would just say that none of this is a substitute for checking in with your firm or your agency about what's allowed. I'm just going to try to talk about some of the permissive rules that Minnesota has and some opportunities. And starting with our first slide there. The Minnesota court rule of professional rule, Rule 6.01, talks about voluntary pro bono public service. There's on the screen a little bit of a definition of what pro bono work is. That rule sets out an aspirational goal of 50 hours a year of pro bono service to attorneys. I think it's important enough that I'll read that the rule says that every lawyer has a professional responsibility to provide legal services to those unable to pay. A lawyer should aspire to render at least 50 hours of pro bono legal service per year. And then the rule goes on to outline different ways in which you can think about pro bono activity. And one thing I want to note is for those who are in the public sector whose jobs don't necessarily allow a client-centered representation, the rule does consider things like engagement in bar activities that help with this process, or one-time legal projects not dealing with specific clients, or advocacy like Bridget talked about, to be part of pro bono. So if you're interested in thinking about trying to aspire to that 50-hour goal, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, I would encourage you to read that rule, because it talks in a lot of detail about what pro bono can look like in Minnesota. I think this has been noted before in the presentation, but remember that about a quarter of the cases in legal aid are handled by pro bono attorneys. So this is a huge piece for Minnesota, and I will move to the next slide. In thinking about why pro bono work and public service are important, just a few considerations that the legal system was created and maintained by attorneys and for attorneys. And so what we know about that is that there are a lot of people trying to represent themselves in court or navigate the court system without a lawyer, and the system wasn't set up to make that a very friendly process. And so that's why the more we can have folks have legal representation or help in the process, even with pro se clinics, that's an important piece of this. I think most of us on this CLE, probably all of us, have a goal of helping solve or contribute to the end of discrimination of bias. And we know that the legal system has a history with that. And if we can help with access to justice, that's a meaningful and real way to contribute to helping end discrimination. Bridget's already talked a lot about the legal aid system and funding and the huge gaps. And so pro bono work can contribute to that. And the cost of legal representation is just rising and making it more difficult for people to hire lawyers to help. We also, I think, all know that within the legal system, there are power dynamics that can increase the likelihood of unjust outcomes, in particular if one person is represented and another isn't, in landlord-tenant situations, creditor-debtor situations, and in domestic violence cases. And so the more there is that disparity and negative power dynamics, it just goes to decrease the public's trust in the legal system. And so that's just a long way of saying, when we participate in pro bono, we can really do some meaningful things for the justice system, even little by little. Next slide. Bridget talked about this a little bit, but one of the takeaways we want you to have here is that when you think about doing pro bono work, there are a lot of ways to do it, and it can be limited in scale or broader in scale. So when we talk about brief services, we're talking about phone advice, limited clinics, things that maybe just take an hour of your time, maybe in an area of law that you don't practice, and so there isn't potentially conflict. Full representation is maybe what we think of more traditionally as taking a case and working it all the way through the process, maybe even over a period of years. And then policy work, and that's the part I was talking about with working with entities of the Bar Association, working on committees, serving on nonprofits, boards that help with pro bono activities. And next slide. As I as I acknowledged, I think a large part of the audience here today are likely government attorneys. And so we do want to acknowledge that there is less ability to participate sometimes in pro bono activities. One resource that I would point everyone to is the MSBA's public law section model policy that was adopted by the Bar Association in 2018. And it really outlines the things that government agencies might need to think about when creating pro bono policies for an office. So it's a really great starting point, either to think about in terms of implementing one in your office, or if you're someone that wants to get involved in pro bono services, it's something that really helps you think about some of the challenges, but then maybe overcoming some of the challenges too. So that model policy can be found easily online. Another acknowledgement is that there are scheduling challenges, and that some people might not be able to do pro bono work during the workday. We would encourage participation in evening or weekend clinics. Often those are just an hour or two and a one-time commitment. So you don't have to think about, you can give back in a small way that adds up to a really big way. As we all know, online opportunities are greater now. And so if you are someone that can participate, say in a housing clinic, or representing someone in housing court, or in other civil arenas, a lot of those hearings are remote now. And so rather than signing up for a whole day driving to greater Minnesota, you can contribute online. And so we hope that that continues to increase pro bono participation. There's a list of resources on this slide. Basically, what we want is for, don't think of having to do this on your own, that if you can only take a piece of it, there are volunteer law students who can help with pro bono matters. There are trainings, there are CLEs. If you're someone who wants to do pro bono work but can't use Westlaw through your employer, the state law library is a really great resource. So just consider all those, that you're not in this alone. Next slide. This slide represents pro bono trends in Minnesota. And you can see from the slide that the pandemic really hit pro bono work in Minnesota hard. I'm happy to say that we are on an uptick again, but there are certainly there's certainly a ways to go. You can see from the presentation that the biggest category of pro bono work is advice only, and that is an area, like I talked about, that you can participate without a lot of time commitment. So in terms of these numbers, as you can see, they are on the rise again. We hope that continues with more ability to participate online. And then I'll talk about some other ways in which this number could be greater. But just for perspective, I looked it up, and in 2023, there were 26,065 active lawyers in Minnesota. So we do have a historic strong culture of pro bono work in Minnesota, but I think this slide serves to show that we could be doing even more. Next slide. As I mentioned, there are several rules in Minnesota that are really supportive of pro bono work. That rule 6.1 just is really something that encourages this kind of work. There is no disciplinary consequences for not doing the 50 hours a year, but it's really baked into our system that this work is really encouraged. The eased conflict limited scope rule that's referenced on that slide, again, it's another one that if you're interested in signing up for clinics or signing up to have pro bono clients, it helps you understand the potential for conflict, but also eases the conflict when you're doing something like a clinic or something where you're not necessarily able to run the conflict immediately. It offers some protection for lawyers in that area. A really important one here is the emeritus and corporate counsel pro bono practice rules. The corporate counsel rule is important, but one that is particularly utilized in Minnesota, and one that there may be some people on this particular presentation who are either retired or nearing retirement, that that rule allows for you to continue to participate in pro bono legal services even after retirement with certain restrictions. I would acknowledge that there are some CLE requirements, but they are fairly minor. And the hope would be that, in particular with increased access to virtual CLE options, that people will consider when they're thinking about retirement, continuing to volunteer in this really important way that not everyone can. So again, this is an overview, but if you are someone who's thinking about your future, I would definitely direct you to that rule and to think about continuing to be able to represent clients even in retirement on a volunteer basis. One other thing I would note is that Minnesota attorneys can get 1 hour of CLE credit for every 6 hours of pro bono work. There is a cap and limitations, but just know that you could be getting CLE credit for work you're doing already, or that's another way to deal with your CLE credits. Next slide. Oh, before I move on to the court section, I would just say that what I'd like the takeaways to be here are, there's that sort of phrase, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. If every one of those lawyers in Minnesota can take a little bite out of this, we could really make a huge difference. So I know people are busy and everybody works really hard, but a little bit of time can make a huge difference in this area. And the other takeaway is to get creative. There are ways you can help even when you have conflicts, and we've provided resources here that you can think about ways to do pro bono work in a way that you might not think of as traditional. And then I guess the last thing is, for newer lawyers here, I would encourage you to think of pro bono not just in terms of how you can help others, but how you can help yourself. This is a really great way to naturally network. It's a great way to try to check out an area of law that you don't work in right now. And so there are a lot of opportunities, and I would turn it over to the judge. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Tom Gilligan, and I've been a Ramsey County District Court judge for 10 years. And in the past, I've been the lead judge in the civil division, and I'm currently the lead judge in the juvenile, family, and child protection division. I'm going to speak on the impact of legal representation on justice system involved individuals and on the administration, the fair administration of justice in the courts. Next slide, please. So when I was in private practice, I realized that I had done a poor job meeting our profession's call to do pro bono work. And I started becoming involved as a volunteer guardian ad litem in CHIPS cases. And later I volunteered for Tubman and represented victims of domestic abuse and order for protection cases. My pro bono experience quite literally changed my life. And it also provided me with the fundamental inspiration and necessary background to do the work that I'm doing now. When I was doing order for protection work, sometimes I wouldn't be able to meet my client until the day of the hearing. And once early in my pro bono journey, I met a client who was sitting with an advocate before a hearing. And when I introduced myself, she burst into tears. And she didn't realize until the advocate told her that I was her attorney, not her abuser's attorney, and that I was there to help her. And then she breathed a sigh of relief. And that sigh of relief is what I experience every time I have a hearing as a judge, no matter the case type where both parties are represented. If the parties have representation, I know that there's a better chance of a fair and just outcome, and they are, for example, more likely to stay in their homes, have parenting time with their children, get old convictions expunged, and pay off debts in a manageable way. That's primarily because attorneys are able to spot issues, do investigation, identify options, and negotiate resolutions. Next case, please, or next slide, please. On this slide, you can see the significant disparity that I think Emily referenced just a little bit ago about the power dynamic and imbalance between representation. Here you can see the significant disparity between landlords and tenants, between creditors and debtors, and between petitioners and respondents in family court cases. In Ramsey County, I think that the representation by landlords is even greater. It's somewhere around 90%. And tenants in Ramsey, even though I don't think these numbers reflect it, tenants in Ramsey have access during their initial appearances to individuals from Volunteer Lawyers Network who don't represent them, but provide them with legal advice before the hearings began. So there is that opportunity to do that work where you're not actually engaging in representation of an individual, but you are providing valuable legal research resources for individuals who are involved in landlord-tenant cases. In consumer credit cases, debtors don't often appear, but when they do, they are almost always unrepresented. And unlike housing cases, legal aid, at least in my experience, doesn't typically get involved in cases like this involving money. The law library in Ramsey County, and I'm on the law library board of trustees, is working on a pilot project to develop programming and clinics for judgment defense and enforcement. And they held their first pilot last week and are in the process of evaluating whether it should continue. And that really is driven by volunteers who staff those things. So that's another opportunity for you to participate in pro bono by assisting in clinics that are put on by places like your local law library. Until I came into the family division, I did not realize the sheer number of self-represented litigants. I don't have the data on this in Ramsey County, but it really feels like 75% of my cases do not have representation of either party. And this puts a tremendous amount of pressure on judicial officers. These cases take more time to explain what the process looks like, what the parties' options are, how they're going to communicate with each other, co-parent, follow orders, file digital exhibits, and get them admitted into evidence at trial. And the most challenging experiences that I have are trials that I conduct where there aren't any attorneys. And as you can imagine, it's just as difficult as it sounds. We can move to the next slide. The most widely used resource in the judicial branch on the mncourts.gov website is the Court Forms tab. I had a conversation with the self-help desk in the Ramsey County Courthouse, and they wanted me to direct everybody to that because that's the best place for self-represented litigants to start in getting access to the tools that they need in order to represent themselves. There's also a pretty robust page for help topics that sets forth various areas for self-represented litigants to navigate through all phases of a case, so that you can get, for example, a list of alternative dispute resolution qualified mediators or representation of yourself at trial, and detailed instructions, for example, on how to present an exhibit and cross-examine a witness. And in addition to the interpretive services that the courts provide to assist in access to justice, we also do have court forms that are translated into a number of different languages, including Hmong, Lao, Russian, Somali, Spanish, and Chuukese that self-represented litigants can use. One thing that is notable right now is that the Minnesota Legal Paraprofessional Pilot Project, say that 4 times fast, just ended last month. And that program is intended to increase access to legal representation in case types where one or more parties typically appear without legal representation. This project permits legal professionals under the supervision of a Minnesota licensed attorney to provide legal advice and in some cases represent a client in court in landlord-tenant disputes and family law disputes. So that is another opportunity for attorneys to provide supervisory pro bono work for a paralegal that may be working with you in your firm. The report was just issued on this, and it appears that paraprofessionals handled over 2,000 cases last year and practiced in 47 counties, covering more than half of the state of Minnesota. The vast majority of those cases were housing cases, and the rest were family. There was a report that was just issued that is making recommendations to the Supreme Court, including making the pilot project a permanent judicial branch program and adding eligibility to provide advice and representation in additional case types. Next slide, please. Last thing I wanted to talk about was the importance of self-help centers. Fortunately in Ramsey County, we have a very well-staffed self-help center. And in particular, of particular value is that the staff there can review pleadings before they get filed. So they catch a lot of errors that otherwise would be problematic for self-represented litigants' cases. The number that you see there at the bottom of the self-help centers section, 35,000 people served, is for the statewide call center. However, in the second judicial district, the self-help desk assisted over 12,000 people. In Hennepin County, the self-help desk there assisted over 26,000 people. And in the 10th judicial district, they assisted over 15,000 people. State law library and local law libraries are really integral to providing programming for self-represented litigants. For example, the Ramsey County Law Library holds clinics with volunteers to help self-represented litigants determine if they have a case to bring or a defense against an action and inform them of the court processes and help them with drafting paperwork, etc. The Ramsey County Law Library, for example, offers a clinic to assist with housing and conciliation, self-represented litigants. And by the way, in the chat, self-represented litigant is an SRL. And in addition, they hold a criminal and expungement clinic. They helped over 186 people last year. They helped over 243 people in the housing court clinic. And as I indicated previously, that they're doing a money judgment clinic. Unfortunately, across the state, law libraries don't get the support that the law requires. And so a lot of them are not staffed and a lot of them don't have the resources that we have in order to do that. But the state law library is undertaking a significant effort to standardize the access to the same type of quality programming and materials that the rest of the local law libraries do. And on behalf of the bench, if I can speak on behalf of the bench, I want to thank everyone who volunteers because you are always welcome in our courtrooms and you always help with the administration of justice and make it a fair process. So people walk out of court and they feel like they've been advocated for and they have been participated and get justice. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Judge Gilligan, and to Emily and Bridget as well. And we are about at time here, so we will throw up our takeaway slide here and hope that you are leaving feeling inspired about doing pro bono work and thinking about how you can connect to your local bar or another option, a legal aid program to try to get involved. And I think we can, Sarah, if people have questions, can people who are available stay on for a minute or two, or should we just wrap now?
If you're available to stay on, I can certainly keep the Zoom open for anybody who has questions.
Anna, can I say one more thing? So
Yes.
there's a program that the Minnesota State Bar Association has put together within the civil litigation section. And the Civil Litigation Section Council has partnered with Tubman to create a training program, a mentorship program for trainees, and provide pro bono opportunities. And that's a great starting place for anyone who's interested in pursuing pro bono. If you are in a law firm or if you are in a corporation, part of your work could be getting buy-in to free up your attorneys to do this type of work, because that is a barrier that often we have to break down in our firms to say, wait a minute, you're doing work for free? So tell me how that works within your business model.
Yeah, thank you so much, Judge Gilligan, for sharing some different opportunities for people to be involved in pro bono work. I think we can try to, we'll follow up with Sarah to see if we can put those together as a list and add them with this presentation on the Law Library website.
And there is an important question in the chat, which is one of the most frequently asked questions is there malpractice exposure? All of the legal aid programs in the network slide that we presented provide malpractice insurance coverage for their pro bono volunteers. So if you're working with Volunteer Lawyers Network or any of the Tubman, any of the programs that we listed earlier, they are going to provide malpractice coverage for you as a volunteer. So are we staying on for more questions?
It looks like that might be it if no one else, but that was good thank you, Lisa, for clarifying that
Yeah, we should
malpractice
actually
coverage
put
is
that in the
available.
slides.
Yeah.
We will add that to
Yeah.
the slides for the next
Yes.
presentation.
Yeah,
Because it is the
absolutely.
most frequently asked piece.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any other questions, so I think we
No.
can wrap it up there.